The last call bell had a tarnished, weary sound. It echoed in the cavernous space of the Black Rook, a final, tinny sigh that signaled the end of another Thursday. For me, it was the sound of relief, the promise of silence after hours of shouted orders, clattering glasses, and the relentless thrum of a jukebox that knew only three emotions: angry, heartbroken, and drunk. I polished the last highball glass, holding it up to the dim track lighting. A single, stubborn smudge remained. My life felt like that smudge, a persistent imperfection on an otherwise clean, empty surface. I sighed and started rubbing again. The motions were automatic, ingrained in muscle memory after 3 years behind this slab of scarred mahogany. Wipe, rinse, stack. The rhythm of my life. Most nights, the staff exodus was immediate and noisy. Keys jangled, jackets were shrugged on, and a chorus of weary see-tomorrows bounced off the walls before the heavy front door wheezed shut, leaving me to the final rites of closing. But tonight was different. The usual chaotic departure had concluded, the silence descending as expected, but it wasn't empty. It was occupied. Caleb was still here. He was the Barback, a creature of the background, moving with a quiet efficiency that was both admirable and, for me, deeply distracting. He hauled kegs like they were pillows, restocked liquor with a fluid grace, and navigated the cramped, chaotic space behind the bar with the silent purpose of a shark. He was a man of few words and even fewer facial expressions, a stoic monolith in a world of loud, fleeting interactions. And for 3 years, I had been hopelessly, silently, and pathetically in love with him. He was stacking the last of the high-top chairs, the metal legs scraping against the concrete floor with a sound that set my teeth on edge. One chair, then another, their silhouettes dark against the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the grimy front windows. He worked with that same economy of motion he applied to everything, each movement deliberate and sure. I watched his back, the way the cheap black staff shirt stretched across his broad shoulders. I knew the map of his muscles better than I knew the streets of my own city. He placed the final chair on its stack, a definitive thud that seemed to punctuate the end of the night. My heart did its usual, stupid little dip. This was it. The moment he would grab his worn leather jacket from the hook, give me a clipped nod that served as his goodbye, and disappear into the night, leaving me alone with the ghosts of spilled beer and forgotten conversations. But he didn't move toward the door. He turned, his boots silent on the sticky floor, and walked toward my end of the bar. He stopped at my elbow, close enough that I could smell the faint, clean scent of the soap he used, a stark contrast to the bar's miasma of stale alcohol and fried food. I kept my eyes fixed on the glass in my hand, my knuckles white. "Stay a minute," he said. His voice was low, a gravelly murmur that I usually only heard in brief, perfunctory exchanges. Need limes, glassware's low, kegs blown, hearing it directed at me, in a sentence that wasn't a command or a statement of fact, felt like a glitch in the universe. My hand stilled. The rag felt damp and heavy. He added, his voice even softer, "Just us, 3 words. That's all it was. But they landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Just us. The phrase hung in the air between us, shimmering with possibilities I had spent years meticulously telling myself were impossible. My pulse, usually a steady, bored metronome, began to race, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I finally looked up from the glass, my manufactured focus dissolving. I met his eyes. They were a dark, indeterminate color in the bar's gloom, but they were fixed on me with an intensity that was entirely new. There was no casual friendliness there, no end-of-shift weariness. It was something else, something focused and searching. I had cataloged every brief glance he'd ever thrown my way, analyzed them for meaning until they dissolved into nothing. This was different. This was unmistakable. He was looking at me. My throat was dry. I managed a nod, a pathetic little jerk of my head. I couldn't have formed a word if my life depended on it. My mind, usually a torrent of anxious analysis, was just a sheet of white noise. Caleb seemed to take my nod as the assent it was. He gave a slow blink, and the intensity in his gaze softened just a fraction, replaced by something I couldn't read. He moved away from the bar and walked over to the sound system, his form a dark shape moving through the gloom. A moment later, the silence was filled not with the bar's usual aggressive rock, but with the soft, melancholic strains of a lone guitar. It was quiet music, thoughtful music. The kind of music you listen to when you're alone. He didn't come back to the bar. Instead, he started on his own closing duties, but his pace had changed. It was no longer the brisk, efficient rhythm of an employee eager to leave. It was slow, deliberate, almost meditative. He wiped down the steel counters, his movements long and smooth. He consolidated the half-empty juice containers, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the flimsy plastic. And I just stood there, holding a damp rag, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching him. We were alone. It was just us. And for the first time in 3 years, I had no idea what was going to happen next. The familiar, comfortable ache of my unrequited crush was suddenly replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating sting of possibility. The night was no longer ending. It felt like it was just beginning. The minutes stretched, each one filled with the quiet sounds of our separate tasks. The squeak of his rag on steel, the clink of bottles he arranged in the speedwell, the soft sigh of the ice machine. I eventually forced my own limbs to move, putting away the last of the clean glasses, my hands feeling clumsy and disconnected from my body. My entire awareness was focused on him, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. I was acutely aware of the space between us, a tangible thing that seemed to hum with a low-grade electrical charge. I watched him from the corner of my eye. He was methodical, his focus seemingly on his work. But I noticed the small things. The way his head was angled slightly in my direction. The way his movements seemed timed to mine, a slow, unconscious dance. When I moved to the sink to empty the dregs of the cocktail shakers, he was suddenly there, reaching for the floor mats. Our shoulders brushed. A brief, searing point of contact that sent a jolt straight through me. I flinched, pulling back as if I'd been burned. "Sorry," I mumbled, my voice sounding rusty. He just grunted, but he didn't move away immediately. He stood there for a second longer than necessary, his presence a warm, solid wall beside me. I could feel the heat radiating from him. I risked a glance. He was looking at the floor, but a muscle was ticking in his jaw. The air grew thick, heavy with everything we weren't saying. My mind raced, trying to decipher the interaction. Was the touch an accident? Was he annoyed? Or was it a test? A question asked without words. He finally bent down, grabbing the edge of the heavy rubber mat and rolling it up with a grunt of effort. The spell was broken. I turned back to the sink, my hands trembling slightly as I rinsed a shaker. My brain was a frantic mess of analysis. He said to stay. He touched me. He's playing quiet music. Each fact was a piece of a puzzle I was terrified to solve, because what if the picture it made was one I had only ever dared to imagine in my most private thoughts? What if it was real? He finished with the mats, dragging them toward the back door to be hosed down in the morning. I finished my tasks at the bar, wiping down my station until the stainless steel gleamed. The room fell silent again, the music a barely there whisper. All the closing duties were done. There was no reason for us to still be here. No excuse. The air crackled with that knowledge. I dried my hands on my apron, my movements slow. I felt like an actor on a stage who had forgotten his lines. What was I supposed to do now? Do I say something? Do I just grab my bag and leave, pretending this strange, charged silence never happened? The thought of walking out that door felt like a physical impossibility, like trying to walk through a solid wall. Caleb emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a clean bar towel. He walked not to his jacket, but to the customer side of the bar, pulling out one of the stools he had just stacked and setting it on the floor with a soft thud. He sat down, facing me. The polished mahogany was a vast, empty expanse between us. He rested his forearms on the wood, his hands loosely clasped. The dim light carved shadows into the planes of his face, making his expression unreadable. But his eyes, they were fixed on me again. Steady, waiting. My heart felt like it was trying to climb out of my throat. This is it. This is the moment. The silence stretched, taut and fragile. I could hear the hum of the beer coolers, the frantic beat of my own blood in my ears. "Leo," he said. My name. He rarely used my name. It sounded strange and significant coming from his lips. "Yeah." I managed, my voice a croak. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just watched me, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. I felt pinned by it, exposed. It felt like he could see right through the carefully constructed walls I had built around myself, see all the loneliness and longing I kept hidden away. "You always look," he started, then paused, as if searching for the right word. "Tired." I almost laughed. Of all the things he could have said, that was the most mundane. It's 2 in the morning, Caleb. We're all tired. I tried for a light, dismissive tone, but my voice shook. No, he said, his gaze unwavering. Not just bar tired. Something else. He tilted his head slightly. You look sad. Even when you're smiling at a customer. The observation was so accurate, so perceptive, it stole the air from my lungs. No one had ever noticed that. Or if they had, they'd never said it. People saw the polite bartender, the guy who remembered their drink order and listened to their problems with a patient nod. They didn't see the man behind the mask, the one who went home to an empty apartment and the crushing weight of his own solitude. Caleb saw it. I had no defense against that kind of honesty. My carefully constructed facade crumbled into dust. I broke eye contact, staring down at the bar top, at the intricate patterns of wear and tear in the wood. I traced a deep scratch with my finger. I'm just quiet, I said, the words feeling inadequate. I'm quiet, he countered gently. You're somewhere else. All the time. I see you. You're here, you're making drinks, you're talking. But you're not really here. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping even lower. Where do you go, Leo? The question was so intimate, so disarmingly direct. It wasn't small talk. It was a genuine inquiry into the state of my soul, and it was coming from the one person I wanted to share it with, and the one person I was most terrified of letting in. I swallow. My throat feels tight, a knot of unspoken words and unshed tears I've been choking on for years. I look up, forcing myself to meet his eyes again. The vulnerability is terrifying, but the thought of lying to him, of deflecting with a joke, feels like a betrayal of this strange, sacred space he has created between us. I don't know. I whisper, and it's the truest thing I've said all night. I just get lost in my head, I guess. He nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. What's in there? He asked, his voice soft, curious, entirely without judgment. And there it was. The invitation. The door he was holding open for me. All I had to do was walk through it. My mind screamed at me to run, to protect myself, to retreat into the safe, lonely fortress I knew so well. But my heart, that stupid, hopeful traitor, whispered something else. It whispered, stay. Tell him. I took a shaky breath. I am standing on a precipice, and the fall looks long and terrifying. But for the first time, the view from the edge is not of an empty abyss. It's of him, waiting, and that makes all the difference. The air is still and heavy, thick with the scent of whiskey and lemon peels. The only sound is that soft, instrumental music, a melancholy soundtrack to a scene I never thought would be part of my life. His question hangs between us. What's in there? Such a simple question. Such an impossible one to answer. How do you explain the tangled mess of years of observation, of quiet pining, of meticulously documented micro-expressions and imagined conversations? How do you say you? It's all you? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My courage, so fleeting and fragile, had deserted me. I looked away, my gaze falling on the rows of liquor bottles gleaming in the dim light. They were my allies, my props. I could talk about bourbon mash bills and the botanical profiles of gin for hours. I could hide behind facts and figures. But this was uncharted territory. Caleb didn't push. He just sat there, patient, his presence a steady anchor in my swirling sea of anxiety. The silence wasn't empty or awkward. It was expectant. He had asked a question, and he was willing to wait for the answer, no matter how long it took. That patience was a gift, a quiet demonstration of respect that chipped away another piece of my armor. It's just noise, I finally said, the words feeling like a cop-out. A lot of overthinking. He considered this for a moment. About what? He was relentless in his gentle way. He wasn't going to let me off the hook with vague answers. He wanted something real. I took another breath, trying to steady myself. Just say something. Anything. About why I'm still here, I admitted, the words barely a whisper. In this bar? In this city. Just stuck. It was a partial truth, but it was a truth nonetheless. It was a piece of myself I could offer without completely shattering. He nodded again, his expression unreadable but attentive. I get that, he said, and the way he said it, with a quiet finality, made me believe him. I'd never once considered his life outside of these walls. To me, he was Caleb the Barback, a fixed point in my universe. It had never occurred to me that he might feel stuck, too. Why are you still here? I asked, turning his question back on him. The boldness surprised me. A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, crossed his face. He leaned back on the stool, breaking the intensity of his forward posture. He ran a hand over his short-cropped hair. Came here for a job that fell through. Construction gig. This was supposed to be temporary. He let out a short, humorless puff of air. That was 4 years ago. Oh, it was a stupid response, but I couldn't think of anything else. We were two ships, moored in the same forgotten harbor, both thinking we were the only one who had dropped anchor. It's easy to stop moving, he said, his eyes finding mine again. Easier than starting again, and in that moment, I understood him. Or at least, I understood that part of him. We were both caught in the inertia of our own lives. The bar wasn't just a job, it was a comfortable stasis. It was predictable. It was safe. The shared confession, as small as it was, changed the atmosphere between us. The tension was still there, but it was different now. The sharp, anxious edge had been replaced by a softer, more melancholic hum. We were not just a bartender and a barback anymore. We were two men, sitting in a dark, empty room, admitting we were lost. He picked at a loose thread on the cuff of his shirt. But I started thinking recently, he said, his voice low and contemplative. Maybe there's a reason I'm still here. My heart stuttered. My breath caught in my chest. I am acutely aware of every sensation. The cold of the steel bar under my fingertips, the low thrum of the cooler vibrating through the floor, the scent of his skin. This is it. The conversation is turning, veering into the very territory I've been so desperate and terrified to explore. I gripped the edge of the bar, my knuckles turning white. A reason? I prompted, my voice thin. He lifted his gaze from his cuff, and his eyes locked onto mine. The intensity was back, 100-fold. It was a laser beam, pinning me to the wall. He didn't smile, didn't offer any comforting expression. He just looked at me, and in that look, I felt the weight of 4 years of his own silence, his own observation. Yeah, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. A reason he didn't need to say more. He didn't need to say my name. I knew. In the deepest, most certain part of my being, I knew. The reason was me. The realization bloomed in my chest, a terrifying, beautiful, and utterly overwhelming flower of warmth and panic. He had been watching me, just as I had been watching him. This whole time, this slow, silent dance had not been a solo performance. It had been a duet. The air left my lungs in a rush. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. The solid ground I had been standing on for years had just crumbled away, leaving me floating in a space of pure, terrifying potential. He saw the panic in my eyes, the way my carefully controlled composure was shattering. He pushed himself off the stool and walked around the bar, his steps slow and deliberate. He didn't stop until he was standing in my space, on my side of the bar, just a foot away from me. The proximity was overwhelming. He was so much bigger up close, a solid, warm presence that seemed to consume all the air in the room. I had to tilt my head back to look at him. His face was shadowed, but I could see the earnestness in his eyes. Leo, he said again, and this time my name was a soft caress. He lifted a hand, slowly, as if giving me time to retreat. I was frozen, mesmerized. His fingers, calloused and warm, came to rest on the side of my neck, his thumb stroking gently along my jawline. The touch was electric, 1,000 volts straight to my heart. My eyes fluttered shut. My entire world narrowed to that single point of contact, the warmth of his skin against mine. All the noise in my head, all the anxiety and the endless analysis, it all just stopped. There was only silence. A perfect, peaceful silence. You're not somewhere else right now, he murmured, his voice close to my ear. You're here. I opened my eyes. He was closer now, his face just inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. The world tilted on its axis. The years of longing, of silent observation, of hopeless pining, all of it coalesced into this one, perfect, terrifying moment. He is going to kiss me. The thought is not a question, but a statement of fact. My body braces for it, a strange mix of terror and elation flooding my veins. My hands, of their own accord, come up to rest on his chest. I can feel the steady, solid beat of his heart under my palm. It's calm, so much calmer than my own. His thumb continues its slow, hypnotic stroke along my jaw. His other hand comes up to rest on my waist, a firm, grounding pressure on the small of my back. He's pulling me closer, closing the last few inches between us until our bodies are flush against each other. It's not aggressive, it's an invitation. A question. I give him my answer by leaning into his touch, a small, almost imperceptible movement. It's all the encouragement he needs. He dips his head, and his lips meet mine. It's not a hard, demanding kiss. It's soft, tentative. It's a question, a discovery. His lips are warm and firm, and they taste faintly of the coffee he drank hours ago. For a moment, we are just still, a soft pressure of mouth to mouth. It's a moment of pure connection, a silent acknowledgement of everything that has passed between us without a single word. Then, I feel a shudder run through him, a deep, resonant tremor. He makes a low sound in the back of his throat, a sound of relief, of surrender. The kiss deepens. His hand tightens at my waist, pulling me impossibly closer, while the hand on my neck tangles in my hair, tilting my head back. And I kiss him back. All the pent-up frustration and loneliness and desperate, aching one of the last 3 years pours out of me. It's clumsy and messy and desperate, but it's honest. It's the most honest I have ever been in my entire life. My fingers curl into the fabric of his shirt, holding on like he's the only thing keeping me from floating away. The world outside of this embrace ceases to exist. There is no bar, no sticky floor, no hum of coolers. There is only the press of his body against mine, the taste of him, the solid beat of his heart under my hand, and the overwhelming, staggering relief of finally being seen, of being home. He breaks the kiss, but he doesn't pull away. He rests his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. His eyes are closed. I keep mine open, wanting to memorize the look on his face, the slight furrow of his brow, the way his lashes cast shadows on his cheekbones. He looks peaceful. I've wanted to do that, he breathes, the words a warm puff of air against my lips. For a very long time, a laugh escapes me, shaky and wet. I hadn't even realized I was crying until I felt a tear track down my temple. Me too, I whisper back. You have no idea. He opens his eyes, and the look in them is so full of warmth and a raw, unguarded emotion that it makes my chest ache. He reaches up and gently wipes away the tear with his thumb. I think I have some idea, he says, and a small, genuine smile finally breaks through his stoic facade. It transforms his entire face, making him look younger, less burdened. It's the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. We stand there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms in the middle of the dark, silent bar. The melancholy guitar music is still playing softly in the background. It feels like we are the only two people in the world. And in that moment, I feel a profound shift inside me. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that has been my companion for as long as I can remember is gone. The feeling of being an observer in my own life, of watching everything from behind a thick pane of glass, has vanished. The glass has shattered. I am here. I am present. And I am not alone. For the first time, the future doesn't feel like a long, empty road. It feels like a possibility. It feels like him. The walk to the subway station was a blur. The city at 3 in the morning was a different beast, hushed and empty, the streets slick with a fine mist that made the streetlights bloom with hazy halos. Usually, this was the part of my night I dreaded, the lonely walk home where the silence would amplify the ringing in my ears and the feeling of isolation would settle deep in my bones. But tonight, the silence was a comfort. It was filled with the memory of him. I could still feel the phantom pressure of his lips on mine, the warmth of his hand on my neck. I kept touching my mouth with my fingertips, half convinced I had imagined the entire thing. But the scent of his soap lingered on my collar, a tangible reminder that it was real. It had all been real. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the dark living room, the city's ambient orange glow filtering through the blinds. The place felt different. My familiar solitude, usually a heavy blanket, now felt like a hollow, empty space where someone was missing. Where he was missing. I slept fitfully, my dreams a chaotic mix of the bar, his low voice, and the constant, replayed sensation of the kiss. When I woke up, my first coherent thought was a spike of pure, unadulterated panic. What now? The cold light of day brought with it a tidal wave of doubt and fear. Last night, In the intimate darkness of the closed bar, everything had felt so simple, so right. But now it was Friday. In a few hours, I would have to go back to work. I would have to see him. What would I say? What would he say? My mind, which had been so beautifully silent in his arms, was now screaming. It was a mistake. A moment of late night, end of shift madness. He was just lonely. You were just convenient. He's going to come in today and act like nothing happened, and you'll have to stand there and take it, and it will be 1,000 times worse than the silent pining ever was. The anxiety was a physical thing, a cold, heavy knot in my stomach. I paced my small apartment, from the window to the kitchenette and back again, a caged animal. I picked up my phone a dozen times to text him, but what would I even say? Hey, about last night, was that real? The thought was mortifying. By the time I had to leave for my shift, I had worked myself into a state of near catatonic dread. Putting on my uniform felt like putting on a costume for a play I hadn't rehearsed. The walk to the bar felt like a walk to the gallows. Every step was heavy, laden with the weight of my own catastrophic expectations. I pushed open the heavy staff door and stepped into the familiar chaos of pre-shift prep. The air was thick with the smell of bleach and fresh-cut limes. A few of the other servers were laughing by the coffee machine. It was all so painfully normal. My eyes scanned the room, searching for him, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He wasn't there. A wave of something that felt bizarrely like both relief and disappointment washed over me. He was usually one of the first people in, stocking the wells before the madness began. Maybe he wasn't coming in. Maybe he had called in sick, unable to face me. The thought was a cold stab of fear. I forced myself to start my setup, my hands shaking as I sliced lemons. I tried to focus on the task, on the familiar motions, but my entire being was attuned to the sound of the back door opening. Every time it creaked, my head would snap up, my stomach clenching. 15 minutes before open, the door swung open, and he walked in. He looked exactly the same. Same black staff shirt, same worn jeans, same stoic expression. He was carrying a case of tequila on his shoulder, and he moved with his usual unhurried grace. He didn't look at me. He walked straight past my station and into the walk-in cooler. The knot in my stomach tightened until I could barely breathe. He's ignoring you. It's over. It never even began. I felt my face flush with a hot, sick wave of humiliation. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to turn around, walk out that door, and never come back. I stared down at my cutting board, at the mangled heap of lemon slices I had just butchered, and fought the urge to be sick. This was it. This was the crash. The inevitable, painful return to reality. A moment later, he emerged from the cooler. I kept my eyes down, bracing myself for the cold indifference, for the complete erasure of the intimacy we had shared. I heard his footsteps stop beside me. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I felt a light touch on my arm. Just a brief, two-fingered tap. It was so quick, anyone watching wouldn't have even noticed it. But I felt it like a brand. My head snapped up. He was already walking away, his back to me, heading toward the other end of the bar. But just before he turned the corner, he glanced back over his shoulder. He caught my eye for just a second, and he gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a dismissal. It wasn't a casual greeting. It was a confirmation, an acknowledgement. It was a silent message, sent across the crowded, noisy room, meant only for me. It said, I remember. It's okay. We're okay. The knot in my stomach didn't just loosen. It dissolved. It evaporated into thin air, replaced by a warm, spreading wave of profound relief. I watched him disappear into the storeroom, and I let out a breath I didn't even realize I had been holding. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. He hadn't forgotten. He wasn't ignoring me. He was being discreet. He was being careful. In the bright, chaotic light of the workday, surrounded by our coworkers, he had found a way to reassure me, to tell me that the quiet, intimate world we had created in the dark was still there, waiting for us. The rest of the shift was a strange, surreal experience. On the surface, everything was normal. We were Leo the bartender and Caleb the barback. We exchanged the usual work-related clipped sentences. Need ice, more napkins, but underneath, a silent conversation was taking place. Every time we passed each other in the tight space behind the bar, our bodies would brush, and the contact, which before would have been an accidental source of my own private longing, was now a deliberate, shared secret. a hand that lingered for a fraction of a second too long on my back as he squeezed past, his fingers brushing mine as he handed me a bottle of gin. And the looks. Across the sea of customers, through the haze of noise and activity, our eyes would meet. Just for a second. But in that second, a whole volume of conversation would pass between us. A shared glance when a customer was being particularly obnoxious. A quick, almost smile when something funny happened. These were our new language, a secret code that existed only for us. I felt like I was floating. The familiar weight of my loneliness was gone, replaced by the giddy, buoyant feeling of a shared secret. I made drinks with a newfound confidence. I bantered with customers with a genuine lightness I hadn't felt in years. The world looked brighter, sharper. The smudge on the glass was gone. I was no longer just observing him. I was a part of his orbit, and he was a part of mine. We were a we. The thought was so new, so fragile. I was almost afraid to examine it too closely, lest it break. As the night wound down and the last call bell chimed its weary tune, a new kind of anxiety began to creep in. A hopeful anxiety. What would happen tonight? Would we fall back into our old routine, or would last night's new beginning become our new normal? The staff began their usual exodus. I started my closing duties, my heart beginning its familiar, anticipatory rhythm. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he started stacking chairs. He moved with the same deliberate pace as the night before. One by one, our coworkers left until the heavy front door wheezed shut, and once again, it was just the two of us. The silence descended, but this time it wasn't heavy with unspoken tension. It was filled with a quiet, comfortable anticipation. He finished stacking the last chair and turned to me. He walked to the bar, just like last night, but this time he didn't stop on the other side. He came around, into my space, and stood in front of me. He didn't say a word. He just reached out, took the bar rag from my hand, and tossed it onto the counter. Then he took my hand in his. His fingers were warm and strong, and they laced through mine with a comfortable, easy familiarity, as if they had done it 1,000 times before. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. "You're not going home tonight," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A gentle, firm declaration. My breath hitched. I could only nod, my throat suddenly tight with emotion. "Come on," he said softly, giving my hand a gentle tug. "Let's get out of here." He led me out the back door, his hand holding fast to mine. The cool night air felt like a balm on my skin. We walked in silence, our linked hands a warm, solid connection between us. We weren't just a bartender and a barback leaving work. We were two people, starting something new, walking away from the place that had kept us apart and together all at once, and heading out into the quiet promise of the night. We were heading home. Caleb's apartment was only a 10-minute walk from the bar, tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street that felt a world away from the noise and grime of the main drag. We walked the entire way in a comfortable silence, our hands still linked. I found myself studying the back of his hand, the strong knuckles, the faint scar near his thumb. It felt surreal, this simple act of holding his hand, something I had imagined so many times it felt more like a dream than reality. His building was an old brick walk-up with a slightly crooked front stoop. He fumbled with his keys for a moment, the metallic jangle loud in the quiet street. The lock clicked, and he pushed the door open, leading me into a narrow hallway that smelled of old wood and dust. We climbed 3 flights of stairs, our footsteps echoing on the worn treads. He lived on the top floor. He unlocked his apartment door, number 4B, and pushed it open, stepping aside to let me enter first. I hesitated on the threshold, a sudden wave of nervousness washing over me. This was his space, his life outside the bar. Crossing this line felt significant, a step into a new level of intimacy that was both thrilling and terrifying. He must have sensed my hesitation. His hand found the small of my back, a warm, reassuring pressure. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. "It's just me." I took a breath and stepped inside. He followed, closing the door behind us with a soft click that seemed to seal us off from the rest of the world. The apartment was small and sparse, but it was clean. A worn, comfortable-looking couch sat against one wall, a stack of books on the floor beside it. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs were tucked into a corner that served as a kitchen. The only light came from a single lamp in the corner, which cast a warm, golden glow over the room. It wasn't decorated, really, it was simply lived in. It felt like him, functional, unpretentious, and calm. "It's not much," he said, his voice sounding a little rough, as if he was nervous, too. "I like it," I said, and I meant it. It was a quiet refuge. I could immediately picture him here, reading one of the books from the stack on the floor, the world shut out. He let go of my hand and shrugged off his jacket, tossing it over the back of a chair. "Can I get you something? Water?" "I think I have a beer left, water's fine," I said, my voice still a little shaky. I felt awkward, unsure of what to do with my hands, my body. I stood in the middle of the small living room, feeling like an intruder. He disappeared into the kitchen area, and I heard the sound of a cupboard opening, the rush of water from the tap. I took the opportunity to really look around. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal trinkets on the shelves. The only personal touch was a small, thriving succulent on the windowsill. It struck me as oddly tender. This big, stoic man, carefully tending to a small, green plant. He came back with 2 glasses of water. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine. The small, familiar spark of contact helped to ground me. He gestured toward the couch. "Sit." We sat on opposite ends of the worn fabric, a careful distance between us. The silence that had been so comfortable on the walk here now felt charged with a different kind of energy. We were out of our context. The bar, with its familiar roles and routines, was gone. Here, we were just Leo and Caleb, and I wasn't entirely sure who that was yet. He took a long drink of his water, his throat working. I watched the movement, mesmerized. I was still in a state of hyper-awareness, cataloging every detail of him in this new environment. The way the lamplight caught the silver in his sideburns that I'd never noticed before. The way his shoulders relaxed now that he was out of his work shirt and in a soft, gray t-shirt. "So," he said, breaking the silence. He set his glass down on the floor. "This is weird." A laugh bubbled up out of me, a release of some of the tension. "Yeah," I agreed. "A little. I've imagined this," he admitted, his voice quiet, almost shy. He wouldn't look at me, his gaze fixed on the glass at his feet. "Bringing you here. 1,000 times. In my head, I was always a lot smoother." My heart did a little flip. He had thought about this? As much as I had. The idea that his stoic silence had hidden a whole world of longing that mirrored my own was staggering. "What did you do in your head?" I asked, my own nervousness starting to recede, replaced by a warm curiosity. He finally looked at me, a faint, self-deprecating smile on his lips. "I definitely didn't offer you a glass of water and then sit a mile away from you on the couch," I smiled back. "What did you do instead?" He held my gaze, and the playful lightness in his eyes was replaced by that familiar, raw intensity. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, closed the distance between us. He shifted across the couch until his knee was pressed against mine, his arm brushing against my arm. He was so close now, I could feel the heat coming off his skin. He lifted a hand, just like he had at the bar, and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His eyes searched mine, as if asking a question. "This," he whispered. "This is what I did," and he kissed me again. Here, on his couch, in the warm, quiet space of his apartment, the kiss was different. It was unhurried. It was deep and sure, and full of a profound tenderness that made my chest ache. There was no desperation in it, no frantic release of years of pent-up emotion. This was a kiss of arrival, a kiss that said, "We're here now." My hand came up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. My other hand tangled in the soft fabric of his t-shirt at his waist. I leaned into him, surrendering to the overwhelming feeling of rightness, of finally being exactly where I was supposed to be. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He didn't move away. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I could feel the slight tremble in his hands. He wasn't as unshakable as he seemed. The realization was incredibly endearing. I was so scared. I confessed into the small space between us. "Today, I thought you were going to regret it." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his expression serious. "Leo, look at me." I met his gaze. "The only thing I regret," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is waiting so long. All those years, watching you, wanting to say something. I'm not good with words. I never know the right thing to say. You don't have to be." I whispered. "Last night, you said everything. I saw how you held yourself apart from everyone. He continued, his thumb stroking my skin. Like you were waiting for something. Or someone. And I just kept hoping. It was me. The simple, honest vulnerability of his confession cracked my heart wide open. All this time, I had thought I was the only one feeling this, the only one trapped in this silent longing. But he had been there, too, right beside me, in his own quiet prison. It was always you, Caleb, I said, my voice choked. From the very first day, it was always you. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He let out a long, slow breath, as if he'd been holding it for 4 years. He closed his eyes and leaned in, pressing a soft, chaste kiss to my forehead, then my cheek, then the corner of my mouth. We didn't talk much after that. There was nothing left to say. We had finally laid all our cards on the table. We just sat there on his couch, wrapped in each other's arms. I rested my head on his shoulder, and he draped his arm around me, his fingers idly tracing patterns on my arm. The quiet in the room was peaceful, comfortable. It was the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. I listened to the sound of his breathing, a slow, steady rhythm that was more comforting than any music. I felt the tension drain out of my body, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion from years of being on guard, of holding myself in, finally giving way to a profound sense of peace. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, he was gently shaking my shoulder. "Hey," he murmured. "You're falling asleep." I blinked, my eyes feeling heavy. The lamp was still on, casting long shadows across the room. "Sorry," I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. "Don't be sorry," he said softly. "Come on, let's get you to bed." He stood up, pulling me gently to my feet. I was unsteady, still half asleep. He kept a steadying arm around my waist as he led me out of the living room and into a small, dark bedroom. The only light came from the hallway. I could just make out the shape of a simple bed with a dark comforter. He pulled back the covers and then started to help me out of my shoes. I felt a blush creep up my neck. The simple, domestic intimacy of it was almost more overwhelming than the kisses. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I wanna," he said simply, not looking up. He set my shoes neatly by the door. He turned back to me. "You can just sleep in your clothes if you want. I have a shirt you can borrow if you'd be more comfortable." The offer was so thoughtful, so considerate, it made my throat tighten again. I just nodded, unable to speak. He went to a dresser and pulled out a plain black t-shirt, handing it to me. I quickly shed my work shirt and jeans, my back to him, feeling strangely shy. I pulled on his shirt. It was huge on me, the soft, worn cotton smelling faintly of him. It was the most comforting thing I had ever worn. I slipped into the bed, and he pulled the covers up over me. The sheets were cool and crisp. He stood by the bed for a moment, looking down at me. Are you going to sleep on the couch?" I asked, the words coming out in a rush. The thought of him leaving me alone in here, even for the night, sent a sharp pang of my old loneliness through me. He gave me a soft smile. "No," he said. "I'm not going to sleep on the couch." He walked around to the other side of the bed and slid in beside me, over the covers. He turned onto his side to face me, propping his head up on his hand. He didn't try to touch me. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a quiet wonder. "Is this okay?" he asked, his voice a low whisper in the dark room. "It's more than okay," I breathed. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering on my temple. "Get some sleep, Leo." He lay down, turning onto his back, his hands clasped behind his head. We lay there in the dark, side by side, not touching, but I was more aware of his presence than if we had been wrapped in a tight embrace. The simple fact of him being there, a warm, solid presence in the darkness next to me, was everything. I watched the faint rise and fall of his chest until my eyelids grew too heavy to keep open. As I drifted off to sleep, a final, clear thought surfaced in my mind. For years, I had gone to bed feeling alone. Tonight, for the first time, I felt like I had come home. The thought was so simple, so profound, it settled in my heart like a warm, glowing ember, a promise of a new beginning in the quiet dark.